Hello everyone, this is Mpho Nenweli. This is the Pain, Suffering and Happiness podcast. This podcast will help you to live fully. Pain and suffering form part of the beauty of life. Embrace the pain, keep pushing and be impactful one day at a time. Yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery. All you have is now. Today's podcast will be focusing on a very interesting topic about why do we go through pain and suffering, and how do we deal or overcome pain and suffering. The episode will seek to define suffering. It will also look at the causes of suffering and the things that we can learn from suffering. I will also highlight some of the things that we can do to suffer less and live a fruitful and blissful life. It is important first to understand what suffering is. Suffering is the process of undergoing pain and distress. It is something that affects our physical body, can also affect us mentally. It can also have some form of strain, leading to stressful situations. And it is also, in most cases, a result of a perception of some imminent danger or harm. And it is also important to note that 90% of our suffering is mental. That means the suffering is internal, it's within ourselves. Our thoughts haunt us, meaning that we suffer from what happened in the past, the mistakes that we have done, and also the bad experiences that we have gone through, the traumas. At the same time, we also suffer the future, which is the worry about the unknown. And all of this is things that happen within our minds. Suffering is also related to our emotions, and also it can also be propelled by the greed, the need for endless things, materialism without any boundaries or any end. It's also important to note that the opposite of suffering is joy and happiness and pleasure. It is also blissfulness and the state of being ecstatic. What are the causes of suffering? There's quite a lot of causes of suffering that I will highlight. And one is to point out that the biggest problem is unmet, cravings and expectations or desires. Suffering can also be a result of illness that can be in the form of lifestyle diseases that we have these days, such as your diabetes, your cancer, your high blood pressure. It can also come in the form of aging. As you age, you lose your abilities to function physically, cognitively, and this can come with its own suffering until one departs this earth. It can also be a result of loss of status, one's social standing in society. There is so much that we get from the positions that we have within society, the respect which comes with them, and the attention that we get from the rest of humanity due to our own social standing. Suffering can also be due to the loss of employment or income. This can make one's partner to leave, one's children to leave. In this modern world, people are not tolerant of people who are unable to meet their needs, in particular issues such as shelter, food, and the ability to afford education, in particular for children. Suffering can also be a result of setbacks in life where you fail in your business endeavors, or you fail in your career, or you are in a hostile environment where you cannot experience any sense of growth, or your intellect is not being rewarded and uh, valued. So it is also a result of failure, which in most cases is defined by society. Uh, some failures can be very helpful in our growth, but unfortunately, we tend to ostracize ourselves because society is very intolerant of failures, and they forget that failure is the one that builds us, that brings the experience, that sharpen our focus and excellence in anything that we want to do. Suffering is also a serious issue related to attachments, being attached either to your loved one, your family, to your friends, to your job or profession. Once you lose that, a lot of suffering takes place. And also, denial of one's spirituality can also lead to suffering in a situation which I can explain as, if you don't embrace your calling, you might find yourself being like someone who's swimming against the tide. If things are not aligned spiritually, you might find yourself suffering immensely or running away from your purpose or what you're supposed to be doing in contributing for the good of humanity. It is also a result of the evilness of the capitalist system, where the economies of the world are controlled by 1% of the population. And in that context, the capitalist system is a zero-sum game where the winner takes all. We see this by the ever growing, of the rich. Uh, the 1%, people like your Elon Musk, your Jeff Bezos, and a whole lot of other people that are extremely wealthy. They have continued to become even more wealthier. So capitalism comes with a lot of negative consequences. This winner takes all attitude is not good for caring for others. The use also of chemicals in food has created a lot of problems where we find people now developing a lot of diseases that were not there or our ancestors never suffered from. Uh, the extreme extraction of natural resources with disregard to the environment has also led to a huge suffering, especially in communities in rural areas that are highly dependent on natural resources for their basic needs. It is also important to note that the role that pharmaceutical companies and medical facilities, there's quite a lot of white collar crime taking place in those places where people are profiting on other people's suffering and misery in the form of sickness. Technology also is being used to invoke fear, in some cases for political reasons or for religious purposes, to rally people so that they can be controlled and abused. The other issue, which is really a serious problem, is the issue of exorbitant profits, which are charged by banks within the whole context of capitalist systems. These profits lead to situations where if you buy a house, you're likely to pay it 3 or 4 times more. And I find that to be extremely evil for people, even governments, to allow banks to make so much profit from other people's lives, where you're supposed to spend 20 to 30 years of your life working for an institution, which is quite a very significant percentage of a person's life in terms of their working life. The issue of informal settlements also has brought with it a lot of suffering. People are staying on vulnerable conditions where there's flooding, on steep slopes where there's landslides. People stay on wetlands, on riverbanks where there are on floodlines. There's quite a serious toll on human suffering. Some people really just stay on top of water because there's just nowhere they can go. Whilst the few who are extremely wealthy own the bulk of the land, which they don't even use. The other issue also is the issue of conflicts, famine, and displacement of people. These have created a very serious toll on humanity in various parts of the world. As we speak, the wars that we are seeing in places such as Russia, between Russia and Ukraine, wars in Israel, together with the Palestinians, there's a lot of suffering for women and children, and people who are living with disabilities, creating a huge destruction that will take generations to address. One other thing also that is quite very important on the human suffering, especially in places such as Africa and other developing countries, is the use of religious dogma to really brainwash people. I would love to give an example of another orator called Mthenge Mackenzie in Kenya, who had his church set up in the Shakahola forest in Kenya, leading to the death of more than 400 people after he brainwashed them to believe that they have to fast until they die so that they can go to heaven. These are the things that have created a serious toll on human suffering. The use of religion to control the poor, those who are suffering and marginalized, the unemployed, and the ones that are living from less. The belief in miracles also has brought a lot of suffering in people, where they have unjustified expectations of things that they expect will just happen without any hard work, leading to some people that one can label as the layabouts, that think religion will just make manna fall from heaven and they can have anything that they want. The man-made challenges of inequality, poverty, and unemployment are also taking a very serious toll on humanity as we speak today. This has created dependent people that rely on social security systems or social grants, and they are also used as political fodder for voting purposes. And the challenge that we're having is that as I speak, more people are falling below the poverty line, leading to a bulging of people, the burgeoning of people at the bottom of the pyramid. A huge amount of people who are suffering, who are poor, who are struggling to make ends meet. Too many people are at the bottom, and this has led to a lot of social ills, such as violence, gender-based violence in particular, social unrest, um, political unrest, wars, violence, drug abuse. Extortion gangs have emanated in various parts of the world, where they are trying to grab their piece of the pie, seeing what politicians are doing. So they are also trying to carve their own niche to access, resources through illegitimate means. Endemic corruption has also brought with it a lot of suffering. Countries that are endowed with natural resources within the developed world are crippled by a few people who are using government resources for themselves and their cronies. And in some cases, also political ambitions and selfishness, through imperial countries, have led to a lot of displacement and wars. And they just feed into what we call the military complex, where we've got companies that make armaments that are in charge of government policy, or they've got so much influence, and all they want is wars that can be used to profit at the expense of human lives. It is also important to note that the bad education systems that we have, in particular in the developing world, have produced slaves, and mainly people that are not innovators, and they're supposed to be dependent, and they study for many years, and after they finish, all they hope for is for government to create opportunities for them. So we creating a people that, in some cases, they come out with degrees that are of no use to the economy. They end up using those degrees to pack shelves in shops and supermarkets. The belief also that government can solve all our problems is also a myth that has been very harmful to many communities around the world. Uh, in most cases, politicians are there to serve their own interests and to cling to power, and then protect their own family interests, and amass a lot of wealth for themselves. So the other issue that we also have to take note of is the money trap. Money has been created to to be a tool to suppress the majority of people. And if you look at it very deeply, money is almost some form of illusion. It really, in most cases, doesn't really exist. It's just basically numbers, which are found within computers. And now we've seen the emergence of new economies, such as based on crypto, which is basically money being used to trade with money without any underlying trade of commodities. So you're not producing anything. So this money that is just exchanging hands, and it's almost like pyramid schemes, but they are now legitimized. These economies are just, really numbers on systems. They don't exist. The money is not anywhere to be found. It's not based on any natural resource of value like gold. So we have to be very cautious. There's quite a serious suffering related to money, currencies, inflation. In cases where some countries, their monies are so valueless, whilst other countries like the United States, whenever they encounter serious problems, they just go and print more money. And then their money is more valuable than other people's money, despite the fact that they are highly indebted. Their economies are run through a lot of borrowings. Uh, Further again, the issue of suffering, it can also be related to um, rejection of people within communities, within their families. Deprivation of food can also lead to suffering. Lack of access to affordable housing, affordable healthcare, and education can lead to a lot of poverty and inequality. The other thing also that is very important to note is that in most cases, good people suffer, and it is related to the fact that they try to help other people. Kindness, it can lead to a lot of suffering, where you sacrifice yourself for the good of other people. And suffering can also be related to failure to accept the seasons of life. In life, there are seasons for happiness and seasons for crying. There is times of wealth and there's time of poverty. There's time of good health, and there's also days of bad health. These are the seasons that we need to embrace. So if we don't, we suffer. Clinging to identity can also lead to suffering, in the sense that in most cases in modern society, we define ourselves from what we have, and the positions we occupy. For example, people always want to say, I am a doctor, I am a lawyer, I'm an engineer. So you have to realize that as a human being, you are more than your own profession. Otherwise, if you cling to a profession and then you lose everything and your profession is of no value anymore, then it takes away a lot of dignity, leading to mental stress and suffering. So we also suffer due to the failure to accept things the way they are. Uh, we need to embrace the fact that things are the way they are because they are supposed to be like that at that particular point in time. And we have to embrace that. The big question that we have to ask ourselves is, can we benefit from suffering? Actually, there's quite a lot of benefits from suffering, and that's why it is part of our life. There is a significance in undergoing suffering in all of us. Suffering can force us to think differently and to become nonconformist and bring solutions to some of the challenges that we face as human beings. It can also lead to forced innovation and adaptation, which is needed for us to grow as human beings. Suffering can also help us to forego attachments, uh, such as relations that we held so dearly. We need to learn that human beings have got their own flaws, and it is through suffering that we learn to become less attached to each other uh, in a good way, not necessarily in a bad way. It is important to note that pain is actually the best teacher. So suffering really teaches us a lot of things in a way that we don't like, but we will appreciate down the line. Socrates states that the unexamined life is unworthy. And in this statement, he's saying that in life, we have to take time to sit back, reflect, and really have deep conversations with ourselves. That way, we can be able to draw lessons from our suffering. And our suffering can help us in building resilience to deal with any tough situations that can come along our path of life. It is also important to note that, as an example, myself, I have benefited immensely from pain and suffering related to sicknesses in various stages of my life. And I will give an example that I managed to write 4 books whilst I was being sick, because I started to realize the fact that life is fragile and it can end at any time. And it gave me a sense of agency to do the things that I told myself I would do when I was old and retired. But the onset of sickness helped me to change the course of my life. It also helped me to start uh, doing podcasting as a way of sharing my knowledge and experiences in life, which is quite very minimal. But I felt that I can use this window of opportunity of being alive to say something that might be able to help one individual somewhere in the world. So I also learned through sickness that and suffering that I had spent a bit of time in my life harboring enemies, people that I held very close and helped all the time and fed them, who really didn't care about me. By the time when things were hard and I was in difficulties and sick, none of those people that I held so closely and spent a lot of time and resources on them came. They never pitched. So it is through suffering that the people that don't care about you, they are the first to run away. Suffering also brings a deep sense of respect for reality. You start to appreciate things as they are. And suffering also brings with it a lot of wisdom. We learn a lot through suffering, and that's how we can be able to tell people things that work and things that do not work. It is because we have suffered and learned a lot through the process. It is always mentioned that it is when we are in deep pain that we have a face-to-face conversation with God, because pain helps us to focus on ourselves and God is within ourselves. If we reflect on our suffering, we can be able to find a lot of meaning, and there's always a silver lining. So there is a benefit from all the suffering that we endure in this life. I would love to make a quote by Viktor Frankl, who is the survivor of the Holocaust in Germany, who once said, "If there is a meaning of life at all, then there must be a meaning in all our suffering." And he said, suffering is an ineradicable part of our lives, as fate and death. Without suffering and death, human life cannot be complete. Without being pessimistic, it is important to highlight ways in which we can suffer less, or we can be able to thrive as human beings despite the challenges of pain and suffering in our lives. One of the most important things that we need to start with is to promote self-reliance. If we don't find ways to meet our needs by ourselves without being reliant too much on the capitalist system, we are likely to suffer dearly. The capitalist system is propelled to make 1% of the population wealthier than the rest of the population. It's a system that is doomed to make people suffer in many ways. And it doesn't necessarily have all the solutions that we require to engage with the challenges we face in relation to poverty, unemployment, inequality within our countries. There is quite a lot of things that we can learn actually from communities such as the Amish in the US, the Mennonites, not necessarily in the way of religion, but in the way of living sustainably. The way in which they conserve their food, they grow their food organically, and they are also not chasing a lot of, vague and empty things that we pursue in the modern world, which just lead to overconsumption, materialism, and self-destruction. There is also important issue of the poor, who are the masses. They need to come together and harness their collective power in order to do things for themselves and not rely much on other people to think that they will offer the solutions for all the problems that they face. We need to forget the reliance or the over-reliance on political rhetoric, which is not beneficial at all, and it has led to a lot of harm within our societies. The pursuit of minimalism needs to be promoted. The unrelenting chasing of materialism is quite very harmful, both to the self and to the environment that we live. And we need to go back to our roots and I might sound very old and backwards, but I still feel that there is space for us to go and build houses out of mud bricks at a lower cost, and that structures that have been successful over the centuries. We have buildings in various places in Mali, in Yemen, of high-rise buildings that were built out of mud. Why do we have to pursue an approach in which we have to spend too much money on building structures that will also end up needing so much to maintain? We need also to learn to go back to focusing on the pursuit for basic needs. If we can be able to cater for our own basic needs in the form of housing, shelter, and medicine, clothing, we will find ourselves, being able to live a better life with minimal suffering. If we can meet our shelter, our food, our clothing, and our housing, we have a better life to live. We need also to focus mainly on using natural resources that are accessible and available. If you're living in a place full of rocks, rather build your house out of rocks. These structures can last a lifetime. If you're living in a place where there's just ordinary soil available, you can do a mud house or a rammed earth house, and then you don't have to end up owing a huge amount which you have to pay for 20 years to the banks. We need also to stop neglecting our cultures, uh, be ourselves, and appreciate where we come from, instead of following hollow cultures that are hell bent on promoting nudism and and swearing, of each other as a norm. There's not really much to learn out of that, and it's not taking anybody anywhere. We also need to harness the wealth of our diversity in the form of heritage, culture, arts. That's where the wealth is. These are the things that have been passed on over the years, and we need to benefit from them instead of being detached and just floating on the air. The formation of local networks is quite very key, in the sense that if we have local networks that can cross-pollinate each other, that can be very important in terms of sustaining ourselves and not being dependent on outside systems. In the sense that if you have a community that can farm, for example, sweet potato, and another one can farm vegetables, and the one can farm animals, we can be able to exchange and share and live comfortably without having to depend on a capitalist system, which is not trustworthy. The other aspect is also the issue of accepting reality. If you want to avoid suffering, accept reality, and accept that things are supposed to be the way they are. And in some cases, there's not really much you can do to change them, but learn and embrace and grow. The other thing is to listen to the truth, which is your own truth as an individual, not outside forces. If you listen to the truth within you, it will guide you. There is a God in you, and that God, in most cases, comes in a form of a very silent voice that talks to you, and is the voice that guides you on a daily basis in terms of what you do, what you pursue. So do not ignore that. Take advantage of the power that has been given you, both spiritually, physically, mentally, and emotionally. It is important to quote Lao Tzu, who once said that he who knows others is wise, but he who knows himself is enlightened. So it simply means if you know yourself, you are likely to suffer less because you understand the way in which you can do things, you understand your capabilities, your limitations, what you can do and what you cannot do. If you know what you cannot do in life and accept that, that is wisdom. That is the best way to live, instead of not embracing the uniqueness that you have. The other thing also is, do not, to avoid suffering, do not live a divided life, in the sense that you say something and then you do something else, or you've got hidden life, and then the one that you portray to the people is not the one that you live behind the scenes. That can create a lot of mental toll, mental suffering, mental conflict, internal mental conflict that can be very harmful in the long term. You also need to compete with yourself. Once you start to compete with other people, you will create a lot of problems for yourself and a lot of suffering. Rather compete with yourself, set up targets for yourself, and then meet them. Or if you don't meet them, then you continue to grow by learning and also changing things along the way so that you become a better human being. But rather focus on your God-given talent, and then rather than looking outside into other people and what other people are doing, because our journeys are not the same and life is also not linear. Some of us will fall through the crack, but if we pick ourselves up, we'll still grow. Others will just have a good trajectory of life and things may work out very well for them, but we are not the same. Each one of us is unique and there's space for us. That's why we are here. Another thing is to stop the self-hate. There is always a dark side of every human being, and it is important to accept that dark side. Instead of running away from the demons that haunt us, rather sometimes it's good to exorcise them, face the demons, and deal with them. There's many ways in which you can do that. It can be in the form of writing all the things that bother you on a piece of paper, and then you can pray over it if you are a praying person, or meditate over it, and over time you can just burn it or throw it, somewhere, and in that way you can be able to sometimes to release that which you carry and you are unable to deal with. In some cases, I've seen in some form of religions, people go and talk to a tree, and just tell all the things that haunt them or all the evils that they've done and communicate it to nature, and then accept that nature will handle it, and then you relieve yourself from carrying the burden from day to day and killing yourself internally without having a solution. Do also not live in fear. Fear is a tool that is being used both in religion and both in politics. So if you succumb to fear, you will suffer a lot. Rather, live an objective life and accept things, and instead of just being influenced by fear, rather make choices that are informed. If there's anybody who is trying to convince you to do something, be it either religion or politics, and they are using fear as a weapon or as a tool to convince you, you must be very concerned, because that which is good, it doesn't require anybody to be fearful in order to believe in it, because it's a good thing in any way. Somebody should be able to convince you without invoking fear. It is important also to note that in order to minimize our suffering, we also have to accept the unpredictable nature of life. Life happens, and there's always a saying that says that dance with whatever comes your way. That way, you will be able to grow and go somewhere in life. You need also to acknowledge your enemies and your haters. Uh, don't dwell on them, because they are busy living their lives and they are suffering from their own poison of being enemies to you. So that is another way of making sure that you flourish in life. Don't live in the past or in the future. Rather, savor the moment, the current moment. The present is the most important moment. That is why it's called the present, because it is given to you as a present. Don't play victim. Uh, Try to, you know, do the best you can instead of victimizing yourself or blaming other people for your failures or lack of success. Blaming your parents until you go to the grave is not going to assist you. Even if you're born poor, you can still do so much for yourself. You cannot blame your parents. You can't blame your siblings for not doing anything for yourself. You have to stand up and do the best for yourself because you were born here to make a difference and you are unique. So you come with your own talents that you need to harness instead of putting the burden on other people to be the ones that do the hard working to make you a success. It is not necessary at all. You have the blessings to succeed by yourself. And do not also be a prisoner of comfort. Allow the tough situations to happen in your life and embrace them and learn from them because comfort will not necessarily bring the best in you. Rather, go for challenges, engage in difficult things like studying for fulfilling stuff, setting yourself higher targets in life to achieve that will bring a lot of meaning in your life. And also choose yourself. It's very important that we can give a lot of love to other people, but you cannot pour from an empty cup. If you don't look after yourself, you will not be able to look after other people. And if you look after other people too much and compromise yourself, you will suffer deeply. And the people will still laugh at you, even if you are the one who's feeding them and compromising your own quality of life. The other thing also that is very important is to accept things as they are and also journal on a daily basis to capture what is happening, and also not capture only the bad, but also gratitude to the things that make your life beautiful on a daily basis. Gratitude journaling is quite very important in ensuring that we don't elevate the moments of suffering and pain. We also elevate those beautiful moments of the small things that makes us happy, that bring us joy. uh, like for example, sitting with a loved one, or reading a beautiful book, or playing a musical instrument, or looking at a piece of art. These are things that we need to pay gratitude to. You will not appreciate these things until the moment where you lose your eyesight. You will realize that seeing a piece of art is a miracle. Being able to walk around and see your garden, it's a miracle. So let's appreciate those things. We will then minimize a lot of suffering. The only place in life where we cannot encounter suffering is at the graveyard. In life, we will encounter a bit of pain, of suffering, and also happiness. It's a combination, it's a package. It comes together. It doesn't come one way. So if you encounter your own fair share of troubles, pain, and suffering, don't think you are alone. You are just living a normal life, just like anybody else. It is also important to invest in the means of production, not necessarily just money. If you were to ask some fellow people, I know people who come from other countries, for example, in Zimbabwe, where economies collapsed, people who had all their savings in the form of money lost everything. But the people who had savings in the form of land, which is a means of production, had their properties gaining value in the form of houses, those things in the form of animals. They had value. Things never lost value despite the inflation that crippled the economies of their own countries. The other thing also that we take for granted is to take advantage, for some of us who come from rural areas, of the roots that we have in the rural areas. Land is cheap in the rural areas. You can build a house cheaper. Land is also under communal rights, so meaning that you cannot, use it as collateral for a loan, and that is in itself can be a very good insurance for difficulties in life. If you start a life in the urban area, it might be as well be very advisable to start by putting a structure or a beautiful, comfortable house where you come from in the rural areas without using debts to finance that through your own savings. And then you can pursue the whole idea of living the, what we call the South African dream, which is modeled around the American dream, where you go and borrow money to buy a house and that you pay for 20, 30 years, and you buy cars that you pay for 5, 7 years. You can do that at a later stage because there's quite a lot of risks in relation to that. I would love to close by saying that let us embrace the moments of pain, suffering, and happiness as forming the beauty of our lives. That's something that we cannot separate. That's how our life is made. We are going to suffer, but we also have the ability to experience joy and happiness at the same time. In closing, this is the Pain, Suffering, and Happiness podcast. This podcast will help you to live fully. Pain and suffering form the beauty of our life. Embrace the pain, keep pushing, be impactful one day at a time. Yesterday is history and tomorrow is a mystery. All you have is now. And I thank you.